'Tis the season, December 19th. I didn't realize that it was today. Yes, check this out. Hello, friends. I woke up this morning a little bit irritated, and this happens every now and then, right? You have different ranges of emotions. I didn't understand really why I was irritated. Sometimes I wake up at, the middle of the night, and because I'm still grieving the death of my father, I go through cycles of just memory recall, and I am almost finished a memoir. Finally, yes. I've been writing a book and I'm almost finished. So it will be published soon. And today, December 19th, just had me in my feels. And I didn't really understand why. I was kind of not wanting to chit chat too much. And I spent a little time in the morning outside, and I was on the lawn, on the ground, in the grass, and the sun was beaming down on me. And I was just in prayer and meditation. And I was wondering, why is this day feeling the way it is? Mind you, I was going to travel to Savannah, Georgia. I should have been in Savannah, but my mother wasn't up for traveling because I wanted her to travel to Savannah and eat some seafood. And I don't know why. I didn't know why at the time when I said, Mom, I really need to be in Savannah on Friday. Can you imagine? And she just wasn't up for it. So we didn't go. So here it is, Friday, December 19th, and I'm sitting on the lawn, like I said, sun beaming down on me in prayer and meditation, just asking the Most High Yah, what's going on? Talk to me. And in my spirit, I was led to get up and go into my office and get a book. And this book is a book that I found in my stepfather's belongings when he died. So I've lost two fathers in a short period of time. And I was with my stepfather as he was dying. I told you I was his death doula. And we didn't have the best relationship. So it was definitely something that the Most High Yah did. It was a move of his spirit very powerfully for me to be the one, not his biological children, but me, the stepchild, the redheaded stepchild, was with him to comfort him and make sure his relationship with the Most High Yah was good. Because he asked me, am I going to hell? And when someone asks you a question like that, you really need to be there to comfort and give real answers. So I called on a pastor to come and talk to him. But I told him he wasn't going to hell. I knew he was. He was a PK kid that just, maybe he wasn't so churchy and into a lot as a child, but when you're forced to go to church, your father's a pastor. But, I'm just getting off on tangents. But anyway, bear with me because I realized when I went to get the book, again, inside of my stepfather's belongings, when I was clearing out some things, this book right here, I guess it would be backwards. It's just simply is titled Skyjack, and he had a bookmark in a certain place in the book, and I realized that today, 57 years ago, December 19th, 1968, is when my father, Thomas George Washington, hijacked a plane from Philadelphia headed to Miami, full of holiday passengers, you could say, a plane full of Jewish people headed to Miami. Okay, let me just say what it is. A plane full of Jewish people headed to Miami for the holidays. I was going on a shopping trip with my father, is what I thought, because my parents had divorced and it was very bitter, custody battle, all of that stuff. So I thought I was going shopping because that's what my father told. That was the cover story. He was taking me shopping. So I'm riding on his shoulders like the little girl, 3 years old, and 3 years old. I'm on his shoulders. We're walking down Market Street, Philadelphia. He's a tall basketball god. He's a chemist. He's this amazing, tall man. And people saw us. They were calling out because he was well known, a basketball god of Philadelphia, played in the Catholic League. So he knew a lot of people in West Philly. So they saw me on his shoulders. Well, and it wasn't weird. It's like, there's Tom with his daughter. So we're headed down really quickly, is how it was said, down Market Street. We were catching the L. We were probably taking buses and taxis headed to Philadelphia International Airport, where we were ticketed passengers. And we were late for our flight. And my dad had a suitcase packed for me with clothes. And my mother was at work. She worked at John Wanamaker's, and she was just going to work, she thought, normal day. And we were living at my grandparents. So my grandparents, saw me off because my mother had to go to work. So we missed our flight. It already pushed off, headed to taxi. And my dad told the gate attendant, I'm scheduled to be on that plane right there, and I need to get on the plane. And they just told him, we'll schedule another flight for you, no problem. And he said, no, you don't understand. We're getting on that plane. And he talked to management, and the plane turned around from taxi and came back to the gate and picked us up. We were the only foundational Black Americans on that plane. And we headed to the back of the plane. Everybody's looking. I remember the eyes on us. I'm dressed like they didn't know who I was. They thought I was some kind of kid from a TV show or something. That's how my mother used to dress me, working at Wanamaker's, right? So we head to the back, and the flight took off. When we were flying over the waters of Savannah, Georgia, where I would have been today, my dad handed a note to the stewardess to hand to the pilot. And the note basically said, don't rock the boat. I'm a chemist. Take the plane to Cuba. And the FAA at the time didn't play around with hijackers, and the plane went to Cuba. We made an emergency landing because we were in one of the biggest planes that they made at the time, the DC-9. Eastern Airlines, huge airplane, was not really, the airport in Havana wasn't really equipped for this big plane to land. But thank God the pilot was very skilled. We skimmed some trees, some palm trees, and it was an emergency landing. So amazing day. But when my dad again handed the note to the pilot, we were flying over international waters near Savannah, Georgia. And that will be very pertinent to the story. But I just wanted to say that sometimes it's a reason inside your body. You have a somatic memory for some reason. But I want to read an excerpt where my stepfather had this book, Skyjack, bookmarked. It's chapter 8, entitled Coffee, Tea, or Rum. There had been a total of 24 skyjack attempts from America to Cuba in 1968. 18 had been successful, By the beginning of 1969, a series of well-greased diplomatic procedures had been devised to handle them. First word of a skyjacking in progress usually came from the pilot of the plane. A few simple phrases such as, "We're on our way to Cuba," or "There's a man with a gun at my head who wants to go to Havana," were sufficient to tell the story. Occasionally, the skyjacker wouldn't permit the pilot to send any radio messages at all for fear that a coded communication to the ground would somehow result in his capture. In those cases, a flight controller would notice on his radar screen that an airliner was veering off course and headed for Cuba. He would pick up the phone and make two calls. The first was to the State Department in Washington. The second to the control tower at Jose Marti Airport in Havana. The State Department would then make a few calls of its own. Among its first would be a person-to-person call to John Fitzgerald, a coordinator of Cuban affairs, to Emil Suter, an attaché at the Swiss embassy in Havana. The Swiss government had been in charge of the dwindling American interest in Cuba since the diplomatic break in 1961. Suter was the skyjacking specialist at the Swiss embassy. John Fitzgerald would ask Suter to take all appropriate steps to secure the release of the plane and passengers. Occasionally, Fitzgerald would make his request through the Czech embassy in Washington. Suter then telephoned the Cuban government offices in charge of hijackings and notified them of the impending arrival of another skyjack at Jose Marti. By this time, however, the Cubans were well aware of what was going on, even if the incoming plane were not yet on their radar. The direct call from the tower in Miami had alerted Cuban authorities to its eventual presence in their airspace. Security forces were readied at the airport. Buses were reserved for the trip to Varadero. Hotel accommodations were set aside. When the plane landed, the hard work had already been done. Now it was just a matter of collecting the skyjacker, processing the passengers, and sending them back to Florida, and mailing the bill to the airline. It was maddening to many Americans that the hijackings couldn't be stopped, especially since there wasn't anyone else to blame. A subcommittee of the House Committee of Foreign Affairs, headed by A.I. Selden Jr. of Alabama, made an intensive study of the skyjackings and concluded that there is no evidence to show that the Castro regime has sponsored these activities. Most skyjackers, the subcommittee stated, were simply escaping criminals, homesick exiles, or disturbed personalities in search of a disturbance. An example of the latter was the December 19th hijacking of a DC-8. I thought it was a DC-9, but DC-8 was one of the longest stretch airplanes that Eastern had in its fleet. So I just wanted to correct that. I thought it was a DC-9. Anyway, Mrs. Joanne Washington, that's my mother, a Philadelphia saleswoman, named her ex-husband Thomas Washington as the hijacker. The little girl he took with him to Cuba was their daughter, Jennifer. The girl was supposed to spend the day with her father. When neither of them returned, Mrs. Washington began to worry. When she learned of the hijacking, she guessed what must have happened. Thomas Washington was not a hardened criminal evading the law, but a troubled father evading problems and defeat. He had sent a note to the pilot of the skyjacked plane warning that he had a gun and nitroglycerin and had studied chemistry. On the way to Cuba, he often lapsed into fits of crying. He complained bitterly about being unable to find work and about the racial hatred and prejudice in America. But now Washington was in Cuba, and his ex-wife had no way of regaining her daughter. Once more, the press couldn't resist the human interest angle, and the dangers of skyjacking took a back seat to the eternal drama of a family divided. I'll stop there. That's pretty deep. I want to read that last paragraph. Once more, the press couldn't resist the human interest angle, and the dangers of skyjacking took a back seat to the eternal drama of a family divided. That sums up a lot, because my particular story dealt with a custody battle, a divorce, and just the fact that a father has no rights in divorce, especially then. The mother got all of the custody and rights to the child. So my father, young man that he was in his 20s, it's a lot to be said, but I'm saying it in my book, and I just wanted to share that because today makes sense. A somatic memory. I want to thank you for listening, and I will keep you posted. If you want to follow me here on the TikToks, I am on YouTube. I try to keep my name consistent across the socials. I'm Jennifer Eason Washington. I do a lot on Instagram under Jenny the John. So I want to thank you for listening as I processed, as they say, to use the therapy speak. And I want to say that writing my book has been the most amazing therapy ever. My grandmother told me to do this. My grandmother, who was the one who released me to my father that day on December 19th. And it really broke her heart. It broke my grandfather's heart, and my mother. My mother is one of the strongest people I have ever met in life. She is a true American foundational hero who stood up to Fidel Castro as a young woman in her 20s. To get me back, she had 11 lawyers from Czechoslovakia. She had a lawyer in Philly, Mike Richmond. I want to send a shout out to Mike Richmond, Philadelphia attorney who helped my mother get me back from Cuba. Even though it took 2 years, they battled it out with Fidel Castro. So again, I will share more when it comes up, but it's going to be in my book, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.